A little hamlet in a peaceful area of Michigan was going to discover in 2006 that the scariest stories don't originate from late-night campfire tales, movies, or the news. They occasionally originate from the house next door. This narrative starts with an instructor. Not famous. Not someone who lived a quick life, was careless, or endangered themselves. It was just a teacher, one of those ladies everyone in town knew by name, who came to Friday night football games wearing a school sweatshirt, coffee in hand, and cheering on the youngsters. She also smiled when you passed her in the grocery store aisle. Almost everyone simply called her Beth, but her real name was Elizabeth Carter. On the surface, Beth's life appeared to be stable. A modest rental home close to the school. She had purchased a second-hand blue Chevy Impala, an entire refrigerator adorned with pictures of her nieces and nephews. However, those closest to her would tell you that things have been more difficult lately. She had spent around a year apart from her spouse. No children. They were still learning what it meant to move on. Perhaps because lesson planning and grading were simpler than returning home to stillness, she frequently worked late. Nevertheless, she was the kind of person who always showed up for her pupils, the youth group at her church, and the annual autumn food drive. And then, one Friday night in late September, she simply didn't come home. The day began as a typical one. As usual, the school bell rung at 7:40 a.m. With a tote bag in one hand and a travel mug of coffee in the other, Beth parked in the area close to the rear lot where she always does. By the side entrance, she gestured to the custodian who was picking up leaves. She instructed 2 sophomore courses that morning. Of Mice and Men was what they were reading. Students subsequently recalled how she asked the children what loyalty meant to them and took the time to describe George and Lenny's connection. No one gave it much consideration at the moment, but one girl claimed that she appeared emotional, as if she had something else on her mind. She ate lunch at her desk, a turkey sandwich and a Diet Coke, scribbling notes in red pen across a stack of essays. At 2:50 p.m., the last bell of the day rang, and kids poured out of the building, chasing freedom. Beth stayed behind. A few colleagues saw her at the copier around 3:30, yawning, joking that she'd rather be at home on the couch with a book. Around 4:15, she dropped a folder on the secretary's desk, progress reports that needed filing, and headed out the door. That was the last confirmed time anyone saw her alive. When Beth didn't show up at church youth group that evening, nobody panicked. She wasn't the type to flake, but people figured maybe she was tired. Maybe she got caught up grading. When she didn't answer her phone, friends told themselves the same thing. She's probably out running errands, or maybe her phone's dead. By the next morning, though, whispers started. A friend drove by her small rental house just outside of town. The blinds were down, lights off. Her Chevy wasn't in the driveway. By Saturday night, her sister, who lived an hour away in Lansing, was making phone calls, leaving voicemails that grew more frantic each hour. By Sunday morning, she called the police. This was Michigan, 2006. It wasn't the kind of place where people went missing every day. Not a big city, not a crime-heavy neighborhood. Just middle America. A teacher doesn't vanish into thin air on a Friday and leave no trace. The first officers who came by Beth's house noticed little things right away. Her purse was inside on the counter. Her reading glasses were by the couch. Shoes by the door. The kind of things people don't leave behind unless they plan on coming back. But Beth hadn't come back. Her car, the blue Chevy, was found 2 days later in the parking lot of a nearby state park. No sign of a struggle. Keys gone. Driver's seat pushed back farther than she would have needed. It was just enough to send a chill down everyone's spine. Rumors started rolling through town like thunder. Some said she must have run away, starting fresh after the split from her husband. But those who knew Beth shut that down quick. She was steady. She wasn't the type to vanish without telling her family. Others whispered darker theories. A random drifter. A student with a grudge. An ex-husband who couldn't let go. But the truth was, nobody knew. And the longer the silence stretched, the more that silence felt like an answer in itself. In a community like this, people notice when the ordinary goes missing. Teachers, nurses, small-town folks, they're the anchors of daily life. And when one is pulled away, the whole town starts drifting. Parents double-check their locks. Teenagers who used to walk home from football practice now begged for rides. Conversations in the grocery store stopped when certain names came up. Beth's disappearance wasn't just a story. It was a shadow stretching over every streetlight and sidewalk crack, reminding folks that evil wasn't somewhere out there in the big city. It was here, right here, in their backyard. By the end of that week, her family knew something was very, very wrong. She hadn't used her bank card. Her phone stayed dark. No emails, no texts. For a woman who lived so much of her life in service of others, the silence was deafening. Police told reporters they were investigating all leads. They combed the park where her car was found, dogs sniffing through damp underbrush, volunteers combing through trails with flashlights. Nothing. The story hit local news. Beloved teacher missing in Cortland Township. People in town clipped the articles, folded them into scrapbooks, the kind of thing folks do when they're praying they'll be able to look back on it one day with relief. But relief didn't come. And by the time the leaves turned and the air carried that heavy bite of Michigan fall, people were already asking the question no one wanted to say out loud. Was Beth Carter still alive? That's where the story of the Michigan 2006 cold case truly begins. With a teacher who should have come home that night, but didn't. With a car abandoned in a park. With a silence that stretched on too long, cutting through the heart of a town that thought it knew its people. And with the slow, creeping realization that this wasn't just a disappearance. This was something darker, something deliberate, something that would not only shake a family, but leave a scar across an entire community. By the second week of October 2006, the town had moved from hope to dread. For 11 days, search parties had combed the woods. Flyers with Beth Carter's photo, bright smile, brown hair pulled back, professional headshot from the school yearbook, were taped to gas station windows, pinned on church bulletin boards, shoved into mailboxes. Missing. Last seen September 22nd. Have you seen this woman? At first, people volunteered in waves. Parents, students, even strangers from nearby counties who'd seen her face on TV. But as the days stacked up, the crowd got thinner. Hope has a way of bleeding out with time. The Carter family, Beth's parents, her younger sister Amy, a handful of cousins, were running on fumes. Her father, a retired factory worker, looked 20 years older than he had in the picture the newspaper ran. Her mother had gone quiet, her voice reduced to one-word answers. And Amy was the loud one, the one shoving microphones out of her face, telling reporters my sister didn't just walk away. Somebody knows something. She was right. On the 12th day, a hunter moving through the back end of the very same state park where Beth's Chevy had been found stumbled across something. At first, he thought it was just an old tarp, maybe left by campers. But as he moved closer, the color didn't make sense. It wasn't tarp blue or canvas green. It was pale. What he found wasn't a tarp. It was skin. The 911 call went out just after 6:30 a.m. Officers descended on the area, sirens blaring, lights cutting through the fog. They taped off the trail, pushed back the growing circle of onlookers. The body lay about 30 yards off the path, partially covered in brush, deliberate, not random. Whoever put her there wanted her hidden, but not buried. The medical examiner later confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. It was Beth, the teacher everyone loved. The woman who had graded papers on her desk just hours before disappearing was gone. And the way she was gone told investigators this wasn't random. Beth Carter had been stabbed, multiple times, chest and abdomen. The blows were sharp, controlled, delivered with force, but not frenzy. It was the kind of violence that spoke of anger, personal anger. There were no signs of sexual assault, no valuables missing. Her watch was still on her wrist, her earrings still in place. Her wallet had been tucked into her jacket pocket. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a stranger's crime of opportunity. This was something else. The sheriff at the time, a gray-haired man named Ron Higgins, gave the first press conference outside the county building. Reporters held microphones up like weapons, trying to snag anything that sounded like an answer. Do you have any suspects? Was this random or targeted? Is the community in danger? Sheriff Higgins cleared his throat, tugged at the collar of his uniform. We believe this was not a random act, he said, his voice tight. We're pursuing all leads and asking anyone with information to come forward. It was the kind of statement that tells you everything and nothing. Back at the high school, classes went on. Because what else can you do in a town that small? Kids filed into Beth Carter's classroom, stared at the empty desk, the untouched coffee mug, the notes she'd left scrawled on the chalkboard the day she disappeared. Essay due Monday. Somebody taped a photo of her above the board. Flowers piled on the windowsill. The classroom turned into a kind of shrine. And in whispers, in locker rooms, in the hallways, people asked the same questions the detectives were asking behind closed doors. Who could have done this? And why? Detectives started with the obvious. They questioned Beth's estranged husband, Mark. The marriage had gone sour the year before. Money fights. Arguments about kids they never had. Friends said Beth had confided she felt trapped, like she was living with a stranger. Mark swore up and down he had nothing to do with it. Claimed he was home the night she went missing. No signs of forced entry in his house, no blood in his truck. He sat through hours of interviews, jaw clenched, insisting, "I loved her. Even if we weren't together, I loved her." But detectives weren't satisfied. Because if there's one thing they knew, it's that the majority of violent crimes against women don't come from strangers. They come from someone you know. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said it had to be a student. A kid angry over a bad grade, out for revenge. Others whispered about a man she'd been seen talking to at a local diner. A co-worker. A parent. Every town has its gossips. But in this case, gossip felt like survival. Because if they could just name who did it, maybe they could make sense of how something so brutal had landed in their quiet corner of Michigan. The crime scene unit combed the woods. Every leaf turned over, every branch photographed. But the killer hadn't left much. No weapon. No clear footprints. No tire tracks. Just a body. And the knowledge that whoever had done this had walked away into the same woods that now held dozens of volunteers, officers, neighbors, all searching for answers, while the killer was already long gone. The funeral was packed. The church overflowed with students in their best clothes, parents holding tissues, teachers sitting stiff-backed in the pews. The principal gave a short speech about Beth's dedication, her light, in the community. Her sister Amy spoke too, voice breaking, saying, "She was more than a teacher. She was my best friend. And somebody out there decided she didn't get to live the rest of her life. Whoever you are, you think you're safe. But you're not. We will find you." Her words made the evening news. Some people said it was too bold, too angry. But others nodded, grateful somebody had spoken the fury they all felt. Because behind the grief, behind the candlelight vigils and soft hymns, there was rage. And rage has a way of demanding answers. But answers didn't come. Detectives chased down tip lines, sifted through false confessions, talked to neighbors who claimed they'd seen a dark sedan, or a man in a hoodie, or nothing at all. Evidence kits were sent off. DNA tested. The backlog in Michigan's crime labs meant results trickled in months later, each one a dead end. And slowly, inevitably, the case file got thicker. The press coverage thinned. The town went back to routines. But no one forgot. Because every time someone walked past Beth Carter's dark classroom, or saw her face on the fading flyers still taped to a gas pump, they remembered. A teacher. A friend. A sister. Taken. And no one knew by who. What began as a disappearance had now turned into something else entirely. A murder investigation. A hunt for a killer who seemed to have vanished as easily as Beth herself had. And as weeks stretched into months, the case grew colder, the leads grew thinner, and the town was left with a single haunting truth. Whoever killed Beth Carter was still out there. When a case like this goes unsolved, it doesn't just fade away. It becomes part of the air people breathe. You wake up with it, you drive past it on your way to work, you feel it staring at you in the grocery aisle. That's how it was in Cortland, Michigan, after 2006. After Beth Carter's murder, time kept moving, but the wound never closed. At first, the town told itself the same thing every American community does when tragedy hits. The cops will figure it out. This is the United States, not some backwater with no resources. They've got DNA, they've got forensics, they've got trained detectives. You don't just kill a beloved schoolteacher in her own home and get away with it. But as the months rolled on, and then the years, that confidence bled out, drop by drop, until all that was left was doubt. Beth's house sat quiet on Willow Lane, a one-story, modest place, the kind teachers could afford, with a chain-link fence and a creaky porch swing. After the funeral, her parents tried to keep it alive. Her dad, Gerald, still came every Saturday to mow the grass. Neighbors said he'd take his time with it, pushing the mower slow, like he wasn't ready to leave once the yard was done. Her mom, Nancy, watered the flowers out front, even in the fall when they were already dead. And then there was the porch light, always on, day and night, even at noon under the blazing sun. Folks in town started calling it the light that never went out. Some said it was for Beth. Others thought it was her parents' way of saying to the killer, "We haven't forgotten." Inside, though, the house had frozen in time. Her laundry basket was still in the corner, half full. Her lesson plan stacked neatly on the dining room table. A coffee mug, lipstick mark on the rim, left in the sink. The Carters couldn't bring themselves to touch any of it. At school, things weren't any easier. Beth's old classroom, room 214, stayed locked for a year before the district finally turned it into a storage room. They shoved boxes of old textbooks in there, broken chairs, extra desks. But teachers swore it felt wrong walking past that door. Some said they still smelled her perfume, something floral, faint, but unmistakable. Others claimed they heard papers rustling inside late at night, when the halls were empty. Her students carried the weight too. The debate team, the one she'd poured her soul into, collapsed after she was gone. Nobody had the energy to keep it alive. Seniors who had been freshmen in her class graduated without ever getting answers about the teacher who once promised them the world. Life went on, but not in the same way. Friday night football games still lit up the stadium, but parents whispered in the stands. The crowd never roared as loud again. It was like Beth's absence pulled the volume down on the whole town. Detectives felt it too. Sergeant Miller, one of the first investigators, later said in an interview, "The scene just didn't add up. No forced entry, no robbery, no motive. It was like she just stopped being. And in a way, so did we." The case file ballooned into hundreds of pages. Witness statements, phone records, photographs of every inch of Beth's house. But none of it pointed anywhere solid. Every rumor turned out to be just that, a rumor. And yet, rumors kept coming. One neighbor swore she saw a dark green pickup parked outside Beth's house the night before her murder. Old model, maybe a Dodge. She couldn't see the driver, just the shadow of a man sitting inside. Police ran down every registered green pickup in a 50-mile radius. Came up empty. Another neighbor claimed she heard footsteps in the alley behind Beth's place around 2 a.m. heavy ones, like a man in boots. When she called the tip line, the detective politely took down her statement, but later admitted there was no way to prove it. The woman brought it up every year at the candlelight vigil. Folks said she repeated it so much. It was like she was trying to convince herself she hadn't imagined it. And then came the drifter story. The week Beth was killed, a man had been spotted hanging around the gas station off Route 57. 30s, scruffy, greasy ball cap, pulled low. Asked locals weird questions about schools in the area. People swore it was him. The police picked him up, found out he was just passing through, heading to Ohio. His record was clean. He had bus receipts. Nothing tied him to Beth. But in town, it didn't matter. For years, people would shake their heads at the diner counter and mutter, "The drifter did it." For Beth's family, those rumors were like barbed wire. Every time a new theory surfaced, they felt that spark. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is the break. And every time it collapsed, they sank deeper into the pit. Nancy stopped going to the grocery store. Couldn't stand the way people stared at her cart, like maybe it held some clue. Couldn't take the half-whispers in the next aisle. Folks lowering their voices, but not low enough. Gerald kept on with the Saturday lawn routine, even through winters when snow buried the yard. He'd shovel the walkway to her door, just in case she somehow came back. The Carters clung to anniversaries. On Beth's birthday, they'd set her favorite cake, chocolate with peanut butter frosting, on the table, uncut. On the anniversary of her death, they'd light candles and sit in silence. Some years, The silence stretched for hours. By 2010, for years in, the case was officially cold. The lead detective retired. His replacement, Detective Carla Ruiz, inherited a file cabinet stuffed to bursting. She spent months combing through it, page by page, looking for threads the original team might have missed. She sent evidence back for DNA retesting, hoping that newer labs could squeeze out something the old ones couldn't. Nothing. She re-interviewed Beth's colleagues, pressing harder this time, hoping grief had softened into honesty. Nothing. She went back to Mark Carter, Beth's estranged husband. His alibi still held. He'd even remarried, had a baby. If he was guilty, he played it perfectly. But Ruiz couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Cases don't just freeze like this, she told a colleague. Somebody knows something. They always do. Still, every door she knocked on closed just as fast, and the silence grew heavier. By the 10th anniversary, in 2016, silence had curdled into resentment. Some folks said the cops had dropped the ball. Others whispered that the killer had to be someone in town, someone everybody knew. Maybe a teacher, maybe a cop, maybe a neighbor sitting at the same diner counter as you. One substitute teacher in particular drew suspicion. He'd been friendly with Beth, often seen chatting with her in the lounge. After her death, he moved to Indiana. That was enough for the rumor mill. People muttered his name for years. Police tracked him down, grilled him again. No connection, no evidence, just another dead end. But the damage was done. Trust eroded. Neighbors who once waved now stared a second too long. Everyone looked at everyone else and wondered, was it you? Still, life went on, even under the weight. New families moved into town, unaware of the history. Kids biked past Beth's house without knowing why it sat dark and empty. The school brought in new teachers. The debate team started up again, coached by someone who never knew Beth. But for the people who'd been there in 2006, the absence never left. Every candlelight vigil, every newspaper anniversary story, every whispered, "Remember Beth Carter?" kept the wound open. Cortland had learned the cruel truth of an unsolved murder. You can't bury it. You can't move past it. It lingers in the walls, in the sidewalks, in the very way people breathe. And just when everyone thought the case would never break, a single, overlooked clue would surface. And everything would change. For almost 11 years, the murder of Beth Carter lived in boxes. Literally, cardboard boxes stacked floor to ceiling in the back of the Kent County Sheriff's Department, each one filled with paperwork, photographs, lab reports. Detectives had combed through them so many times the files were soft around the edges, fingerprints smudging the corners. It felt like the case had been squeezed dry. But in 2017, something shifted. Cold cases don't solve themselves, but sometimes it only takes one fresh pair of eyes. And that fresh pair belonged to Detective Carla Ruiz, the same detective who had carried the file for nearly a decade. She'd never let it go, never fully shelved Beth's murder, even when other cases demanded her time. She told her captain, "If I don't figure this out, it'll be the one that buries me." And then one rainy afternoon, in the middle of rereading Beth's old phone records, Ruiz saw something she couldn't believe had been overlooked. Beth Carter had received a call the night before her death. A short call, just over 2 minutes. The number had been dismissed at the time as a misdial, a payphone number, dead end. But Ruiz stared at it. Payphones weren't common in 2006. By then, most had been ripped out, relics of the 90s. So why would a random payphone call land on Beth's home line the night before she was killed? She tracked it. The payphone was still listed in an old city maintenance record, outside a Shell gas station, less than 3 miles from Beth's house. And here's where it got strange. That same gas station had logged a minor police call the night of Beth's death, a report of a man loitering, described as mid-30s, wearing a ball cap. The same description the town had whispered about for years, the drifter. Ruiz pulled the log, reread the witness statement. The clerk at the gas station remembered the man clearly, said he'd been fidgeting, looking over his shoulder, using the payphone around 9 p.m. When asked later if she recognized Beth's photo, she froze. "Yeah," she said. "That's the woman he asked about. Said he was supposed to meet her." Back in 2006, that statement was dismissed. The drifter had an alibi. But now, with phone records lining up, it wasn't so easy to ignore. Ruiz felt her pulse quicken. 11 years of silence. And suddenly, two threads knotted together. A phone call and a memory. She pulled the old evidence box marked miscellaneous tips. Inside, buried under forms and scribbled notes, was a Polaroid. Grainy, poorly lit, snapped by a patrol officer outside the gas station that night. It showed the payphone, the neon glow of the Shell sign above it, and in the background, barely visible, the tail end of a pickup truck. Dark green. The same truck Beth's neighbor had sworn she saw outside Beth's house. For Ruiz, it was like a lightning strike. The investigation reignited. The cold case unit reassembled. Detectives started pulling DMV records, tracking down every registered dark green pickup that matched that shape and era. One by one, they eliminated them. Two new. Wrong model. Owner dead. Owner out of state. And then, they found one. A 1994 Dodge Ram, dark green, registered to a man named Daniel Reeves. Age 43. A name that had surfaced once, briefly, back in 2006, then disappeared into the noise. He'd been a substitute teacher. The same substitute who used to sit with Beth in the lounge. The one who left town months after she died. When detectives knocked on Reeves's door in Indiana, he looked surprised but calm. He'd aged, heavier, balding, quiet. He let them in, offered coffee, even joked that he thought the case had been solved years ago. But Ruiz noticed something off. On his mantel sat a row of photos. Family, friends, vacations. And there, tucked almost out of sight, was a photo of Beth Carter. Cropped, worn, as if handled too many times. When she asked about it, Reeves stumbled. Said it was from a school trip, couldn't remember why he'd kept it. His hand shook as he set the frame back down. That was enough. Ruiz knew. The police didn't arrest him right away. They wanted to be sure. They wanted the case airtight. They got a warrant, searched his truck, now rusted, but still the same dark green Dodge. In the glove compartment, tucked under insurance papers, was a scrap of lined paper. A note, in Beth Carter's handwriting. It said, "Daniel, we need to talk. Tonight." The breakthrough had come. 11 years of silence cracked open with the force of an earthquake. The man everyone trusted, the substitute teacher, the guy who smiled, who blended in, had been hiding in plain sight. And when word of the evidence hit the town of Cortland, Michigan, the shock was like a second funeral. When the knock came on Daniel Reeves's door, it was early morning. A soft Michigan sun was barely pushing through the blinds, painting his living room in pale gold. He was still in sweatpants, holding a mug of coffee. From the outside, it looked like any ordinary Tuesday. But the officers on his porch knew nothing about this morning would end ordinary. The warrant was signed. The evidence was stacked. And Daniel Reeves, the quiet substitute teacher who had once been trusted with the children of Cortland, Michigan, was about to see his name dragged out of the shadows. Detective Carla Ruiz had waited years for this moment. She stood just behind the uniformed deputies, her hand tightening around the folder in her grip. Inside were the phone records, the Polaroid, the neighbor's sworn statement, the note in Beth Carter's handwriting, the note that whispered louder than any witness ever could. When Reeves opened the door, he tried to smile. He even joked, "You folks again? What did I do this time? Forget to return a library book?" But Ruiz didn't smile. She looked him straight in the eye and said the words Beth's family had been praying to hear for over a decade. "Daniel Reeves, you're under arrest for the murder of Beth Carter." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But in that moment, it was deafening. The entire weight of 11 years slammed into the small space between the walls of his home. Reeves's face twitched, the first crack in his mask. His voice, once steady, broke. "This is a mistake," he muttered. But Ruiz didn't answer. Word traveled fast in Cortland, faster than anyone expected. Within hours, the small town buzzed like a hive torn open. Phones rang. Coffee shops whispered. Old neighbors stopped each other in grocery aisles, shaking their heads. "Daniel? No way. He used to watch my kids. He was at our church picnics. He was so normal." That last word, Normal, cut deepest. Because isn't that the scariest thing? How normal monsters can look when they're standing right in front of you. For Beth's family, the arrest was a gut punch wrapped in relief. Her mother, now older, gray streaking her hair, wept when reporters shoved microphones toward her. She said, "I prayed every night for this. I just didn't think I'd live to see it." Her voice cracked, not just with grief, but with the terrible knowledge that the man who had sat at her kitchen table years earlier, smiling, polite, asking about Beth, had been the same man who took her away. Her brother clenched his jaw when asked for comment. He said only, "We trusted him." And then he walked away. The trial was a spectacle. Small-town courthouse, but national-level curiosity. Reporters from Detroit, Chicago, even New York lined the steps. Satellite vans crowded the block. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the man who had lived quietly for a decade, hiding a secret darker than anyone could imagine. Inside, Reeves sat at the defense table, wearing a cheap suit, glasses perched on his nose. To the jury, he looked more like a weary math teacher than a murderer. And maybe that was his angle. Normal, harmless, forgettable. But then the prosecution laid the evidence out like knives on a table. The phone records, the mysterious payphone call traced back to him. The gas station clerk, pointing her finger across the courtroom, saying, "That's the man I saw that night." The truck, the Polaroid tail light matching his Dodge Ram. And finally, the note, Beth's handwriting, his name. "Daniel, we need to talk. Tonight." Each piece clicked together like gears grinding toward a conclusion no one could escape. When the jury left to deliberate, the courtroom sat heavy, silent, except for the scratch of pens and the shuffling of papers. Beth's family clutched each other. Ruiz stared at Reeves, memorizing the way he sat, the way he tapped his fingers nervously against the table, as if the truth itself was crawling up under his skin. And when the jury returned, it didn't take long. "Guilty. First-degree murder." The words dropped like thunder. Reeves's mask finally shattered. He stood, shaking, his voice cracking as he shouted across the courtroom. "She came to me. She wanted me there. She asked me." Gasps rippled through the benches. The judge's gavel hammered down, but the damage was done. His outburst wasn't just a denial. It was a confession twisted in anger, a glimpse into the obsession that had consumed him all those years ago. Beth Carter hadn't been a random victim. She had been targeted by a man who sat inches away from her every day, a man she'd trusted enough to write a note to, a man who mistook kindness for invitation, familiarity for ownership. And when she tried to end it, whatever it was, he killed her. The sentence came swift. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Reeves was led away in chains, his head bowed, his future reduced to gray walls and iron bars. For the town of Cortland, the arrest didn't just close a case. It ripped open an old wound, forced everyone to look at the face of a killer who had walked among them unnoticed. Parents who once left their kids with Reeves shuddered. Teachers who had once joked with him felt sick. The church he attended quietly scrubbed his name from their rolls. And Beth Carter's name, finally, after 11 long years, was spoken with justice instead of just grief. But here's the thing about cold cases, they don't just haunt families. They haunt whole communities. They remind us that evil doesn't always come with a warning label. Sometimes it wears a smile, brings a casserole to the potluck, helps you grade papers after class. Sometimes it's the person you'd least expect. And when the mask comes off, the shock isn't just about what they did, it's about how close they were all along. Beth's story, fictional, yet painfully familiar, echoes across small towns all over America. Towns where trust runs deep, where everybody knows everybody, or at least thinks they do. It forces us to ask questions we don't like asking. How well do we really know the people sitting beside us? How much darkness can hide in plain sight? And what does it mean, for a community, when the monster they feared wasn't some shadow on the edge of town, but a man who lived right in the middle of it? Closing beat, slow, heavy. Beth Carter's life ended on a quiet Michigan night in 2006. Her case lay frozen for over a decade, but the truth refused to stay buried. And when it finally clawed its way to the surface, it left behind not just answers, but scars that will never fade. Because in the end, the most terrifying stories aren't the ones about strangers. They're about the people we thought we knew. Before we end tonight's case, let me leave you with something to think about. Stories like this leave us shaken, not just because of the crime itself, but because of the people behind it. Viewers always ask, why did he do it? And how did she know? The story of Elizabeth Carter isn't just about a missing teacher. It's about two minds colliding in ways most of us will never fully understand. On one side, you had Daniel Reeves, the quiet neighbor, the man everyone thought they knew. But beneath that calm surface lived patterns of obsession, rejection, and control that built up for years before he finally acted. On the other side, there was Detective Carla Ruiz, a woman who refused to let Beth's case fade into another unsolved file. Her instincts, her persistence, and her ability to read between the lines were what finally broke through the silence. And here's the thing. If you've ever found yourself wondering why killers think the way they do, or how detectives develop the instincts that solve cold cases, I've put together 2 companion ebooks for you. Inside the Killer's Mind takes you deep into Daniel Reeves' psychology, piece by piece. The detective's instinct lets you see the case through Carla Ruiz's eyes and understand how good detectives sharpen their instincts. If tonight's story left you asking questions, these ebooks hold the answers. You'll find both linked below. Read one, or read them together for the full picture, and step into the minds that made this case unforgettable. If you've ever wondered what really drives a killer and what it takes for a detective to bring them down, both ebooks are waiting for you. You'll find the link in the description. You're the type of viewer who enjoys complex, spooky tales. If you've read this far, you belong here with us. Then, I would appreciate it if you could leave a comment with your opinions, hit the like button to keep the rain coming, and, most importantly, subscribe so you don't miss the next real story. These tales continue because of your help. Join the community instead of merely observing.